Okay, we can start then.
No worries. All right, so welcome to Pediatric Reunification Module 2. Today we're going to be talking about the Hospital Family Reunification Center, Pediatric Safe Area, and Family Reunification Site. Go ahead, next slide.
So our first activity for using Mentimeter is just getting some attendance, just so that we are able to keep track of those who are participating, but also would like to use these module series to get their MOC credit, making sure that we can accurately display who has all attended. I'll leave this up for about 30 seconds, and then we can go on to the next one. Okay. Great, thank you all for doing that. Our next slide is just a fun little activity because this is being broadcasted through Region 5. Just kind of would like to see where people are joining in from. As you can see, you're going to be able to drag a little dot and just kind of plop it wherever, just so we can see where everyone's hanging out from.
Oh, so much fun.
All right, great. We have a fun little spread. Yay. Okay. Dr. LaForte, off to you.
All right, so welcome again. My name is Roxana LaForte. I am one of the pediatric emergency medicine faculty at Riley Hospital, Indiana University. And I'm also the fellowship director for the Indiana University Disaster Medicine Fellowship, and I'm the site PI for Region 5 for Kids for Indiana. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you guys about this today. Next slide. So with this module, we're going to talk about those three sites that are kind of the three main sites that should be incorporated into a reunification plan. And so hopefully by the end of this module, you'll have an understanding of what those sites are and why they're important. And then we also hope to that you'll be able to start considering who should be involved in the planning process, where some of these sites should be located, what kind of things are needed, and how you can identify and track patients within these sites. So I also want to mention, I know that these, sometimes when we go through these, we think about the difference in the facilities that might be represented here. I know there's a variety of facilities represented here. And you might think that these large quaternary care centers have a ton of resources and have plenty of space and staff to create these three sites. And maybe some that do not have as much of the resources may not be able to fully create these three sites. And we understand that. And I think we want you more to focus on the idea of these three sites and why they're important. And then really consider your own site and what you have available and how you can make those work for what you have. Go ahead, next slide. So kind of to set the stage, I know that you've already completed Module 1, so we know that reunification planning is important. But just sort of go through that again. We know that 25% of the population is made up of children. And so the risk of a disaster occurring and involving a child or children is high just by the amount of the population that they make up. But also, if you think about it, children spend most of their waking time away from their primary guardians from the age of 5 on into adulthood. So there's a large amount of time that kids are going to be separated from their parents. And so a disaster that might occur, again, high risk that occurs when they are not with their primary guardians. And another reason a reunification plan is super important. Also, with the way that information gets spread nowadays with social media and how rapid information can spread, whether accurate or inaccurate, it's parents, when they are separated from their child and they're concerned that that an incident has occurred or their child might be sick or injured, are going to frantically be wanting information and wanting to be reunited with their child. And a mass casualty event, this can get very chaotic if you don't have a plan in place. So super important to have something laid out, some sort of plan in place for this type of event and for the response and the crowdsourcing and everything that's going to happen with this type of event. Next slide. All right, so we're going to talk about these. I'm going to introduce these three primary sites, and then we'll kind of go through them in more detail as to what really is needed to plan for them. Next slide. So the first one is the Hospital Family Reunification Center. And I like to think of this sort of as the first point of contact with families that are really searching for or coming in for information. So if children are involved in a disaster, there's going to be not just the surge of patients, but there's going to be a surge of family members, whether direct family members or friends of families. There's going to be large amounts of people coming in looking for information. And so this is the place that you can direct them so that you can distinguish those patients who are just looking for information, or those people who are just looking for information, from actual patients who are seeking care, and really help with that crowdsourcing. This should be a location that's private and secure, and a place that you can direct families away from the clinical areas. Next slide. The second site that we're going to talk about is the Pediatric Safe Area, and I feel like this is a little bit more self-explanatory. So it's going to be the site where a child who may have been brought in and treated and is ready to be released, but there is no family member there, a secure and safe place that those children can stay while they're waiting for that reunification process to occur. Next slide. And then the family reunification site. So this basically is the location where you want the reunification to occur. So once you have identified the family and identified the child, you need a location that's separate, that reunification can happen, again, safe, secure, away from the other environments, so that can occur and they can be safely released from the hospital. Next slide. Okay, so first let's talk about that Hospital Family Reunification Center. So do not underestimate the number of calls and the people that will come in when they have heard or when there's been an incident, especially when there's public information about it. Oftentimes, and if you work in hospitals and emergency departments, even with even small mass casualty incidents, so like a van accident or a bus accident, or things that include not huge numbers of patients, a lot of times you will see huge numbers of patients just looking for information, trying to get information on potential family members that might be there, whether they know that they're there or not. We think, recently we had a van that was like a church van that was in a car accident, all minor injuries, but the information wasn't accurate. And so we had huge numbers of people showing up trying to find out if their child was there. So they will show up, they will call, and it's super important to have a plan for what to do with patients who are frantically wanting to know information about their child. So basically, as they come in and they identify as someone who's essentially looking for information or trying to find a patient, you can direct them to the Hospital Family Reunification Center. It's going to be a separate location so that you can prevent overwhelming lobbies and waiting rooms and create a more controlled and supportive environment. Next slide. So again, the purpose is really to provide a private and secure area for people to come together while they're waiting to find information about the child or to reunite with family. This is also a place where we can gather information. So as they come in, we're going to gather information from them so that we can start working on that reunification process. And then also you want a place where they can have psychosocial support because obviously, again, this is going to be a super high stress scenario. Next slide. So the location for this area, for this center, you really want it to be away from the emergency department. And oftentimes that can be difficult. Parents or family members don't want to leave the clinical areas because they feel like they're not gonna be able to find their child if they leave that clinical area. So really having a secure place that is well demarcated, so signage and a clear method on getting from the clinical area to the reunification center, whether it's somebody walking them there or very clear signage on how to get there. But somewhere you can clearly direct patients who come in through the main entrance or the emergency department entrance. You want it to be away from media gathering areas. You don't want families to feel pressured to talk to the media, and really trying to keep them away, keep this center away from that is ideal. And again, you don't really want them wandering off and potentially going back to the emergency department when they're looking for the bathroom or trying to get food or something like that. So really keeping it somewhere where they have access to restrooms, food, and water, and can have everything they need while staying in that secure space. You also, when you're thinking about the space that you're going to choose for this, think about the ability to communicate in this space. Is there an intercom system, or are you going to be calling out names? Again, you're going to be gathering information and starting that process of tracking and looking for their family member and trying to reunite. And so you may have to be calling out names. And so think about that as you're sort of trying to figure out where you would use for this space. This should be secure. Again, you don't want unwanted media exposure. And then you also want to consider accessibility needs. Next slide. So the staff and the supplies that you would want for this area, chaplains are great to have here. Again, this is, this is a high anxiety, very stressful time. And so having them there to help with the variety of things that we might need, but also in keeping the families calm, potentially praying with them and talking to them sometimes can be very helpful. Security would be ideal. As you'll see as I go through each of these, I'm going to mention security in all of them. And so in those scenarios where you might have, security might be running thin, you're going to have to kind of decide where you want them or how you can place them. But ideally, if you could have security here also, again, to prevent any injuries and to make sure everything is going smoothly. This is a great place for the social workers to be too. They can, again, get that tracking process started. Oftentimes they have ways of communicating. They can help communicate with other hospitals and other outside organizations to really help find where people's family members are located. Interpreters also hugely important if they're available, even if it's by phone or video or in person. A frantic family member that's trying to describe their child or tell you what they're looking for, who they're looking for, is that anxiety level is going to be even higher when they can't communicate. So an interpreter is hugely important in this center. Again, clearly marked instructions and signage to reach the locations so that families aren't so hesitant to leave that clinical area, and a clear understanding of this is where you need to go and this is where we will give you information. So if you're looking for information, that's where you need to be, not in the emergency department trying to open doors and look in rooms and things like that. Trying to make it as comfortable as possible. If you have a small room and everybody's just standing there, again, anxiety levels are going to be increasing. That stress is going to go up. So this can take hours. It can linger for a long time. And so really creating a comfortable environment for people is ideal. So tables, chairs, that sort of thing. And depending on the tracking system that you're using, if you're using a digital form, then make sure that there's plenty of computers available for them so that there's not like lines out the door for them to get onto the computer and submit their information. If it can be by phone chargers would be ideal. If you're doing it by paper, make sure there's plenty of paper and pens and area tables for them to write that information and to and people available to take that information down. And then nutritional services, again, bathrooms, but ideal if you can get food in there, water, the basic needs so that people are kept comfortable. Next slide. So this diagram kind of shows the flow from Texas Children's, which I think they did a great job with this. But you can see how, so the family comes in and they're, express that they are looking for someone who they think is involved in the mass casualty. They get escorted to the Family Reunification Center. They have a wristband there, which I think is a great idea. They complete the form there, so they basically check in, put their information in so that that tracking process can get started. And then they stay in that family reunification center, and that's where they wait. They wait for updates, wait for information, and then, as you can see, it kind of goes on, and whether they get reunified with the family or when they find that match, then they go somewhere else, escorted somewhere else to get reunited, which we'll talk about. Next slide. So that's the Hospital Family Reunification Center. Any questions about that right now?
Feel free to type in the chat, unmute yourselves. There's also a cool Q&A function with Mentimeter if you'd like to use that. But we'll give it like 30 seconds just to give people time to type their thoughts, and then we'll move on to the next portion.
Do you see any that I don't see, Holly?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay.
We're good to go.
All right. So next is the pediatric safe area. Next slide. So this, as I mentioned, I feel like is pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially a location where you can safely place children after they have been treated and essentially would be discharged, but their family is just not there yet. So this is, again, if you think about it, multiple children involved in some sort of mass casualty incident, they've already been exposed to trauma that puts them at increased risk of having emotional effects after the event, just being directly exposed to a trauma. So consider the high amount of stress of these children, and really the ideal situation would be to get them out of the emergency department into a secure, safe area as soon as possible. And that's what this pediatric safe area really does. Next slide. It's also, so it's kind of dually purposed. So it's great for the kid because you're getting them out of that environment, preventing them from witnessing other traumatizing things that they might be seeing if they're just sitting in that emergency department. But also it helps decrease the crowds in the emergency department. You want to get patients that don't need to be in there out so that the clinical teams can really focus on the really severely sick and injured children that are continuing to present. So clearing out rooms for other children. So it moves them to a safe place that they can start to heal and wait to be reunified with family. Also, this by having them in a place that's in the hospital still, they can be monitored if they had a head injury and they had a scan, or if they had a laceration that was repaired and now they're discharged. They can be monitored still there for other issues. Next slide. So the location of the PSA, you really want this also away from the emergency department, definitely away from media. This is even more important just because these are children who are not with their guardians. So you don't want the media to be able to reach them. And ideally away from the other reunification sites. Security, I would say, if anything, if you have to choose where they're going to be, this is a super important place for them to be. You don't want people coming in there trying to see if that's their child, potentially taking children that have not been properly reunified and identified. So you definitely want security here, or the place to be a very secure area. And then just when you think about the area in general, think about just a child-proof area. So some sort of safe area for children to be in. If you have young children, the safety of the area as you would anywhere you're putting children. Think about bathroom access. If there's infants, diaper changing areas. You definitely want food and water access. And if it does end up getting into kind of a longer time frame, you do want quiet spaces to think about naps and potentially for them to sleep. Next slide. So the staff and supplies, so if you have child life specialists, they're the perfect people to be in here. They are trained in this type of thing. So child life specialists to help care for these children would be great. If you don't have that, something else you consider is if there's a child care center in your hospital, a daycare center that's attached to the hospital or that's part of the hospital. When you start talking about this plan, really talking with them about how they can help, whether you can use their space or if they could potentially, some of their child care specialists could be a part of this and come to a different space and help care for the children there. That's kind of a great way to use those resources in this type of scenario. Again, security, and then other things to think about. Again, they've been involved in a traumatic experience, really providing things in that room that can help them sort of calm down, start feeling back to normal, especially if they're super young and don't have a great understanding of what just happened. So things like games, toys, movies can be a good distraction, making sure that they have their basic needs met, so snacks, drinks, those types of things. Next slide. Okay, so that's the pediatric safe area. Any questions about that?
Again, I'll give you some time to do that, but there was one. Oh, just kidding. Just a suggestion for later. But we'll give you a little more time to type out a question. If you want to use Mentimeter, you can. Otherwise, feel free to speak up. Love to hear from you.
I'm going to keep going.
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. So, and finally, the family reunification site. Next slide. Okay, so again, the purpose of this is really to have a location that you're actually reunifying the medically cleared children and their families so that they can start that healing process and depart from the hospital. And you really want this to occur. So you want to, once you identify that a child in the family, you have that match, you really want them to reunify as soon as possible so that you can decompress both the Family Reunification Center and the PSA and the crowds throughout the hospital. So as quickly as you can reunify and get them out the door, that would be ideal. Next slide. So again, ideally, you'd want a location separate from the other reunification areas. You don't really want that reunification to occur in front of families that are still waiting to find out what's happened to their child. That can increase the stress level and for those families. And it can be a very emotional reunion. And so ideally, you'd want that away from the other sites and secure and away from the noise and chaos of the event also. Again, if you can have it somewhere near the hospital exit, then you can have that reunification occur and then have them actually just exit the hospital from there. And again, avoiding media. So then once a child has been medically cleared and their guardian is identified, this reunification should occur in this location. Another thing to consider when you are sort of laying out your plans and deciding on different locations is how you're going to have families get back and forth from the different areas. So obviously from the PSA, from the pediatric safe area, to and from, you're going to need someone to escort that because that's a child. But from the other areas, I guess, and you got to think about like the resources that you might have. Would you just use signage and have them go back and forth, or would you have a runner or someone whose role is to really take families back and forth between each of the different areas? Obviously, would be ideal. The other thing to think about, though, too, with this family reunification site is if that child was medically seen and medically discharged, you are going to have somebody who can give discharge instructions when they reunite that family and give them those and they can talk about whatever was done and what injuries were had and what the discharge instructions are. Next slide. And then for children who are not medically cleared, so again, once you find out that there is where a patient is and where a family member is, even if they are still in the emergency department or if they're in the operating room or the PICU, reunifying as soon as possible is ideal, especially for the family member that's waiting to find information. So bringing that family member from the reunification center, if that's where they're waiting, and then taking them to the bedside or wherever they need to be to reunify the patient and the family. And then death notifications, which are going to be discussed later, that should also occur in a separate location. Again, you don't want families waiting to be hearing about that. You don't want that happening in the same place where you're reunifying happy families. So just something to consider too. Next slide. And so this is an example of a layout of a family reunification site. I've seen others where they are much smaller and they don't, they're really just like a few chairs or a couch or that sort of thing in a smaller room. This is ideal. Having a couple different areas is ideal because if they do need to have some sort of interview, if they're going to be evaluated by the detective or that sort of thing, then having a space for that to happen would be nice. It's going to happen after the reunification. But most of the time you don't want to accumulate crowds in this area. You really want that reunification to happen. And then as soon as you can get things going, really get them out the door so they can begin their healing process. Next slide. And these are, the Texas Children's Hospital Family Center plan is one of the plans that we're sharing. It's a great plan. It kind of goes through a lot of each of these different details. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics Reunification Toolkit goes through all of these in much more detail and the people to include, clear lists of things that you want to consider with each of these different sites and kind of how you can start building. So those are both here and are readily available, publicly available. Next slide. And that's all I have. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
I believe we had a few questions within the presentation. So I'll stop sharing my screen so you don't have to deal with all that. But so on page 22, so on page 22, there was a question about age, I believe. Page 22. Are there recommended ratio based on age?
So there are recommended like childcare separations based on age and ratios in that aspect. I would say to follow those. But in the fact that this is hopefully going to be a temporary and there will be somewhat of a fluid change of patients, I don't think it's, there should match ratios of like person, the provider who's in the room, whether it's a childcare provider or child life, and how many children they can watch. I think that's usually around like 4 to 5 from my understanding in childcare settings. I think it might be different within each state, but I would say for that pediatric safe area, it should match that. So if it's getting crowded, trying to get another person in there to help would be ideal. But as for separating age, ideally, if it's fluid, then you can, mix ages as long as it's a safe environment. And again, having security there would be ideal.
Um, I have a question. Great presentation, Roxana. That was great. I've read before when they talk about the family reunification site to kind of sometimes get like your local schools involved and maybe like your local churches. I didn't know if you'd read anything about that because I know sometimes it's a little iffy in case it's like a mass casualty incident and you don't have the space to put all these patients or, all these people just bombarding your ED. Did you read anything about that? Like kind of like getting in touch with your community
I
site?
think, yeah, 100%. I think that should be the very first step in planning is finding out because there are other organizations, the Red Cross, and depending on where the event occurs, they may have plans in place to set up some sort of family reunification center or a family assistance center nearby the incident. So whether there are organizations that already do this and practice that, then definitely step one before you develop a plan is finding out what's out there and what's in place already, and they can definitely help. So yes, that's actually a great comment. If there are organizations that are really good at this and have resources for this and have practiced this and done this, then using them, leveraging those resources is huge. And then it's also super important if likely, even if there is something set up nearby the school or nearby the event, because crowds will come to the hospital, you'll have to have something set up at the hospital also. But having communication between those two. So if you have a patient there, you can let them know if the parent is there, and so that there's someone who's communicating back and forth so that you're sharing information appropriately.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Before I let you go, just letting you know what to look forward to. We have 3 other modules coming up in the next couple of months. So the next one, Dr. Yaski will be presenting for us with security concerns. Then we have plan activation, and then module 5 will be recovery of what to expect after a surge like this, and hopefully everyone can fix their plans. Just again, a reminder that with these modules, we are offering MOC Part 4 credit for 25 points. So basically to get this is to attend asynchronously or here right now virtually for all the virtual module series, complete a post survey that's going to happen, and then submit a draft of the updated reunification plan or a list of planned reunification changes to us at the end. And then one last Mentimeter thing, and then you can be on your way. We're just kind of checking to see how this presentation went, how if it made sense, meets your expectations. If the speaker was knowledgeable, that would be great. I'll take all 5s. give people a few more seconds to get their answers in. Otherwise, as a reminder, this module series is in collaboration with Region 5 for Kids and the Pediatric Pandemic Network. This portion of it has been done by Region 5. And thank you, Dr. Lafort, for all the hard work that you've put into it and being here today for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that is all I have for you. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, feel free to email me, reach out to Dr. Lafort or Dr. Lucci, who's also been heading up this reunification educational module series with us. But otherwise, I hope you have a good rest of your week and look forward to seeing you at Module 3.